If there's one place on Earth where skyscrapers define ambition, it's New York City. And in Manhattan, right along Central Park, a row of ultra-luxury towers has come to symbolize both incredible engineering and spectacular problems. Billionaires Row. It isn't a single street, but a cluster of super-tall condominiums lining 57th Street and the blocks just south of Central Park, built to attract the global ultra-rich. Apartments here can sell for tens of millions, but just as often, they sit empty. Billionaires Row has seen record-breaking designs, but also lawsuits, bankruptcies, and towers that sit half-empty. From the creaking walls of 432 Park Avenue to sluggish sales at Central Park Tower, these skyscrapers are as controversial as they are ambitious. And at the very center of this skyline stands one tower that takes the idea of ambition to an entirely new level. Steinway Tower. A skyscraper that cost more than $2 billion, took 12 years from planning to completion, and somehow managed to become the world's thinnest skyscraper. The fourth tallest building in the United States, and somehow one of its loneliest. How? Let's find out. The 2000s and 2010s marked a new era for Manhattan's skyline. Developers weren't just competing to build tall, they were competing to build thin. It all started with 157 in 2014, followed quickly by 432 Park Avenue in 2015, a tower so slender it became a global talking point. Together, they sparked the creation of what would soon be nicknamed Billionaires Row, a cluster of ultra-luxury towers along the southern edge of Central Park. But why here? The answer was money. In the years after the global financial crisis, international wealth, from Russian oligarchs to Middle Eastern royalty, poured into Manhattan real estate. These apartments weren't really homes, they were treated as safety deposit boxes in the sky. Developers saw an opening. And thanks to a 2013 zoning change that allowed them to buy air rights from surrounding low-rise buildings, they could suddenly build higher and thinner than ever before. That's where Steinway Tower comes in. Unlike other towers that started from a clean slate, this one had to rise out of a historic landmark, Steinway Hall. Designed in 1925 by Warren and Wetmore, the same architects behind Grand Central Terminal, the building had to be preserved. Instead of demolishing it, developers designed a super-tall tower that would incorporate the landmark and rise from its light court. But here's where things get extreme. The Steinway Tower's footprint is just 59 by 75 feet, smaller than many suburban houses. And yet the plan was to make it soar to 1,428 feet in height. That makes it not only the world's thinnest skyscraper, but also significantly taller than the Chrysler Building at 1,046 feet. In fact, Steinway Tower ranks as the fourth tallest building in the entire United States. All of that on a base narrower than a townhouse. A height-to-width ratio of 24:1, meaning the tower is 24 times taller than it is wide. It wasn't just financially risky, it raised the fundamental question: how do you keep a tower this thin from swaying or collapsing? To find out, engineers drilled nearly 200 steel anchors up to 100 feet into Manhattan's bedrock, creating a foundation thick enough to hold the impossible. But anchoring was just the first step. The real challenge was still waiting above ground. How do you keep a tower this thin from being torn apart by the wind? At 1,428 feet, the problem isn't just gusts pushing against the structure. It's something called vortex shedding, swirling air currents that can set a building swaying until it cracks itself apart. For Steinway Tower, with its extreme slenderness, this wasn't just a concern. It was a potential death sentence. So, engineers did something radical. They designed the building to let the wind straight through. On the 51st, 71st, and 86th floors, entire sections were left completely open so that air could pass freely through the structure. By breaking up those dangerous wind patterns, the tower could stand tall without shaking itself to pieces. And this wasn't the first time Manhattan had to fight the wind. In 1978, the Citicorp Center nearly faced catastrophe when engineers discovered diagonal gusts could topple the whole building. The fix? A secret overnight retrofit that reinforced more than 200 joints while tenants slept, plus the installation of New York's first tuned mass damper, a 400-ton block sliding at the top of the tower to counteract sway. Even 432 Park Avenue, another Billionaire's Row giant, relies on open mechanical floors every 12 stories to cut down wind forces. But at a 15-to-1 height-to-width ratio, even that building still creaks and groans so loudly in storms that residents have called it intolerable. Steinway Tower had to go further. With a 24-to-1 ratio, it's nearly twice as slender as 432 Park, meaning every solution had to be pushed to the absolute extreme. That wasn't enough on its own. Steinway Tower also needed some of the thickest sheer walls ever built in a residential tower, 30 to 36 inches at the base, tapering to 16 inches higher up. And these weren't ordinary walls, they were poured from 14,000 psi ultra-high-strength concrete, nearly twice what most skyscrapers use. Finally, the team added a series of outrigger trusses, giant steel and concrete beams that tie the central spine to the outer walls. Imagine a ship's hull flipped upright, holding the structure steady against nature itself. Even with all this, the top floors still sway several feet during storms, a reminder that in buildings this extreme, compromise is part of the design. By 2021, after 8 years of construction and more than $2 billion spent, Steinway Tower was complete, an engineering triumph in every sense of the word. But the bigger question remained, would anyone actually want to live there? Every dream feels good until the real-world rules apply to it, and Steinway Tower was no different. Instead of eager buyers lining up for $30 million condos, sales stalled. In fact, the tower went through 3 different sales teams in just 6 years. By 2022, developers claimed nearly half the units were sold, but those were mostly contracts, not closings. By the time keys were handed over, only a fraction of deals actually stuck. By 2023, 2 years after its completion, the tower was pretty much empty. That raised the question, what went wrong? The answer was money and lawsuits. The project was so over-leveraged that in 2017, the developers defaulted on a $325 million loan. One investor, Ambase Corporation, lost its entire stake and spent years in court trying to recover. By 2019, lenders were threatening foreclosure, and by 2023, Apollo Real Estate had to write off $82 million just to move on. Even when sales did happen, they came at a price. Literally. Units have been selling at 6 to 17% discounts compared to their original listings. A condo first priced at $14.2 million went for just $11.75 million. Momentum only started returning in 2024. Over 15 units sold for $263.7 million, with another $127 million under contract. Better, but still far below what investors had expected for the world's thinnest skyscraper. And while the building is no longer the empty ghost it once was, it hasn't shaken its reputation. For many New Yorkers, Steinway Tower isn't just a monument to engineering, it's a monument to speculation and how even billion-dollar towers can fail when the market turns. For all its financial chaos, Steinway Tower is still one of the most extravagant residential buildings ever constructed. Inside are just 59 units in total, 45 in the tower and 14 in the historic Steinway Hall base. Most are full-floor apartments while others are duplexes. At the top sits the crown jewel, a 4-story penthouse currently listed for over $110 million. And the details are staggering. Residents step into private elevators that open directly into their apartments. Bathrooms are finished in Italian marble. Kitchens gleam with bronze and rare wood finishes. Amenities include an 82-foot indoor lap pool beneath vaulted ceilings, a paddle court, even a private barbershop and shoeshine stand. This is New York luxury at its most extreme. But here's the contradiction. For all that opulence, much of the tower remains empty. At night, many floors are completely dark. Only 2 units in the Steinway Hall base have ever been leased, renting for up to $75,000 a month. The rest? Still waiting for occupants. Even with the recent bump in sales, the building still feels eerily quiet compared to what it was built to be. And that contrast has given Steinway Tower its enduring reputation. An engineering marvel filled with luxuries almost nobody uses. Across Billionaires Row, nearly half of all luxury units remain empty. They were never really meant to be homes. Instead, they became what critics call safety deposit boxes in the sky, places for the ultra-wealthy to park money, not live in. Russian oligarchs, Chinese billionaires, Middle Eastern royalty. This was the global audience developers were chasing. But while those towers rose, the rest of New York was facing a very different reality. In 2023, luxury residential sales fell by 40% compared to the year before. At the same time, the city's average rent hit record highs, leaving millions of New Yorkers struggling to afford a place to live, even as $50 million apartments sat dark and unused. And that's the contradiction. Projects like Steinway Tower generated thousands of construction jobs, but in terms of actual housing, they've added almost nothing. A billion-dollar skyline for the few, while the many wrestle with a crisis on the ground. It was supposed to be the pinnacle of ambition, the world's thinnest skyscraper, 12 years in the making, a $2 billion gamble. Instead, it's become a reminder that even the most daring feats of engineering can fail if they're built for speculation instead of people. So the question remains, would you want to live in the world's thinnest skyscraper? Or was Steinway Tower doomed from the start? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next MegaBuild story. Thank you for watching it, and see you in the next one.